Welcome back to the Convo Couch, everyone. Pasta Jardula here.
And I'm Fiorella.
And Johnny Sue is still spinning on the ones and twos. Fam, interesting weekend. Start of the week right now.
Yeah.
A lot of craziness the other day.
Yep.
Still going on, getting phone calls, getting tweets this morning. So I'm sure we'll get back at that. But sometimes this American exceptionalism, when we think that only things are going on in the United States, can get a little bit stupid at times. So today we brought in a special guest. This guest right over here loves to show pictures of exotic animals all over his Twitter. And he also knows every single word to every single song on Daryl Hall and John Oates' greatest hits. We brought in Mark the Shark Sleboda.
I think my parents had one of their records. Hey, Pasta, Fiorella, Johnny. Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the Conversation Couch.
Yes. For you.
That's the formal Russian way, the Conversation Couch. How would you say that in Russian, by the way?
Разговорение.
Okay. We should change it to
Divan? Разговорный divan, I guess. It doesn't really work in Russian.
You made it work, though, my friend. You made it work. So, obviously, we heard in the beginning, other than my joking about the animals and Daryl Hall and John Oates, there are a lot of things that go on outside the United States, and a lot of times in American politics, especially the Twitter peeps, they don't like to really talk about foreign policy. However, we like to stay connected on the ground to what's going on. So that's why we brought you on the show today, and I want to thank you for coming on, as always, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
All righty. So let's talk about what's been going on. We've been hearing, of course, already people on the left embracing the protests that have been happening on the streets. So you described Alexander how do you say it?
Navalny. Alexei Navalny.
Navalny as a
far right.
Like you described him as a far right ultranationalist and a CIA asset. Can you give us a little bit more insights to why you think that is?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so first of all, I don't know how you guys missed it, because according to the Western journalists covering Moscow, this was literally the biggest story in the world. Everyone in the world was talking about this. Evidently, everyone from China to India to Brazil to Topeka, Kansas was waiting breathless on their smartphones, waiting to find the next dramatic development in the pre-announced arrest of this fringe figure in Russia who polls at 2%. You guys weren't? You guys didn't?
No.
You weren't waiting on your cell phones? No. Okay, so maybe it wasn't the biggest story in the world. But it definitely headlined the protests resulting this weekend. Definitely headlined the cover of every newspaper, the news outlet online in the West. Forget the protests in the Netherlands, forget the giant protests in India going on, forget the protests in the United States, in Tacoma or wherever. Russia. There were tens of thousands of people protesting across Russia.
Yeah.
Were they?
Tens of thousands?
Did you go out and look at the crowds?
How many people does Russia have? 148 million. Right? But this is the biggest story in the world. Why? Because they want it to be the biggest story in the world. All right. So who is Alexei Navalny? Okay, so Alexei Navalny started off in Russia in the early 2000s as a right wing, by any stretch of the imagination, usually described as a nationalist blogger.
Sorry, something went wrong.
He was invited over to the United States to do a Yale World Fellowship. Now, this is a program that Yale does. It invites 16 people a year and trains them to send back to their countries, right, to be future leaders, right? Okay, so it trains them to pursue U.S. foreign policy interests in these countries, right? It gives them individual and group training and coaching, right? That's what it claims to do. Navalny has a long history that is quite different from the way he's presented in the Western press today. When I say far right and ultra nationalist, all right, I'm gonna tick off a few boxes for you. He's extremely anti anti-immigrant. He has created a anti-immigration movement. His anti-immigration stance is funded in ethno-racism. He is extremely against people from the Caucasus in Russia, right, the southern mountainous region, where Chechnya and Dagestan and Ingushetia are, and further south. He's referred to them as cockroaches. And he has also used racial epithets to refer to people in a political party he was. He referred to a female delegate, something that would translate in English in polite speak as, I guess, black rear end, because Russian racists refer to the people of the Caucasus as blacks, right? He's also an extreme and Islamophobe and has preached against Russia's open policy toward Muslims and the building of mosques in the country with government assistance because, liberal Democrats do that. He has headlines the Russia Day March in Russia. Okay, this is a march. They kind of co-opted a new Russian holiday post-Soviet Union, which is supposed to be like a national day. Well, he made it for ethnic nationals, right? Russia, while it is majority ethnic Great Russian, if you want to call it that, there are different words in Russian for Russia, the ethnicity, and Russia, the state nationality, right? So there's a separation between the two, Ruski and Rossiyski, right? It's not the Ruski Federation because it's more than just ethnic Russians. It's the Rossiyski. It's a civic national identity rather than an ethnic-based one. People like Navalny hate that. They hate that Russia is a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional federation of some 188 indigenous ethnicities and 5 major state-supported religions, traditional religions. The Russia Day March, he's also led race riots in the Moscow suburbs. Okay, there are an incident where a person from the Caucasus was involved in a murder, and they have to turn this into a ethnic racial issue, and those particular incidences got extremely violent. So anti-immigrant, Islamophobe, racist, pro-gun. He's a gun nutter. He thinks he thought, all right, and he hasn't changed any of his positions, that the solution to Russia's immigrant problem as he sees it is to hand out guns to ethnic Russians. Great idea, right? What could go wrong? He has created campaign videos for himself, promotion videos, referring to the people of southern Russia, the Caucasus, as cockroaches, and suggested that that guns is the solution to dealing with them. His economics is neoliberal, and he's heralded by the West as a democracy champion and anti-corruption crusader. Now, it's true that Alexei Navalny has stopped positioning himself publicly as a nationalist, and he's rebranded himself as an anti-corruption crusader. That's his big shtick now. And that, of course, has to be taken with a salt, because Navalny has twice been convicted of fraud and embezzlement. Now, and you might say, oh, that's the Russian government, politicizing the case, which is usually what it's called. Except one of those cases was brought by the French cosmetics firms Yves Rocher, which some of you may know. And in order to believe that this was a politicized case by the Russian government against Alexei Navalny, you have to believe that Vladimir Putin controls the French cosmetics firm Yves Rocher, which I don't personally believe he does. But, hey, you do you. Yeah. So he has rebranded himself in this way in an attempt to be more palatable to the Western press, which is still his biggest constituency. He regularly polls around 2% nationally in Russia. His own polls in his last aborted presidential run, he wasn't allowed to run because he has convictions on his record, gave him 3%, so slightly more. That's his own polling. So in case you want to question, the validity of polling in Russia, it's the same whether it's national polling, whether it's opposition Levada polling, whether it's international polling or his own polling. He's not popular because Russians know his real beliefs and his history. His big shtick now is anti-corruption and, of course, anti-Putin, anti-government.
Yeah.
He wants to overthrow the government. And that's why Western journalists love him. Yeah. So all these liberal journalists that report on Russia are able to either ignore or whitewash away on the rare occasion in a single sentence his nationalist views in favor of their full-throated activist support of him, the platforming, the promotion. And that might be all very well if your primary concern is you don't like Putin. But for those of us who live in this country, we actually don't want any more race riots in Moscow. We really don't want that. We don't need a far-right figure. Being an immigrant to Russia myself, this is of particular concern to me. At which point, one of the Western liberal journalists I was debating said, he wouldn't be prejudiced against you. You're white Slavic descent. And I said, thank you for proving his racism. Thank you.
Mark.
Mark,
I got a question really quick. We're told here, though, that Putin is the racist, that Putin's anti-Muslim, that Putin hates gays, that Putin is the corrupt one. I mean, how do you square that circle right now with everything is told to us over here in the West about Putin?
Okay, well, first of all, that's nonsense. Russian nationalists, whether it's Alexei Navalny or even more hardcore nationalists, are against Vladimir Putin and the Russian government because they run Russia as a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional federation the way it is in the Constitution. And Alexei Navalny has Putin, okay, so you want to talk about the homophobe bit. By Western standards, Vladimir Putin's position is kind of 1990s Clinton-esque, defense of marriage-esque, don't ask, don't tell policy. Right. That's the actual position of the Russian government. There is no persecution of homosexuals. Right. Like say in India or these other big democracies where it's illegal. It's perfectly legal. There are gay clubs in Moscow and all over the country. What isn't allowed is the promotion of the homosexual lifestyle to children and gay parades. And you can criticize from a progressive LGBT position Putin and Russia for this. That is fair game, except that Alexei Navalny has the same position on that particular issue, so it doesn't really earn you any points.
Gotcha.
So Alexei Navalny was given plenty of opportunities, right, to say, I don't actually have those beliefs anymore. Now I'm a kind, fuzzy anti-corruption crusader, except that in 2017 in The Guardian, interviewed by Sean Walker, he reaffirmed these beliefs, said that they haven't changed at all, and that I regret nothing. The same thing in 2020 in Der Spiegel, right? Just last year, he was once again asked about his beliefs, and he said that his beliefs have not changed at all. So the idea that this is old news or he has changed his positions is false.
For the next question.
Yeah.
So that brings us to his alleged poisoning, which is the most recent incident which led to these recent protests. He was supposedly poisoned in Russia by the most deadly poison in the world, Novichok, the poison too deadly to use, according to the New York Times. He was Russian doctors examined him and said, no poisoning, but he definitely has pre-existing medical conditions. He was then allowed to fly out of the country to Germany, rather strange if the government was trying to kill him. And he was treated in Germany at Charité Hospital. And the German military, not the Charité Hospital, then came up with a diagnosis that he was poisoned by Novichok. Not only normal Novichok, but some new, undiscovered form of Novichok that hasn't existed before. Now, Novichok is supposed to be a nerve agent, right? A nerve agent 8 to 10 times more powerful than VX, right? Now, serving as a U.S. Navy nuke, I actually had CBRN training, right, including chemical weapons. I know what the symptoms, the horrific effects on the human body, the onset times of exposure to even a normal nerve agent are, much less than something that's supposed to be 10 times more powerful than VX. None of Alexei Navalny's symptoms on the airplane or the description of his case give any credence to that account whatsoever. Yeah. The German military refused to release his medical data, right? The data confirming their diagnosis, how they treated it and everything. And they explained it away that, well, it's a privacy issue. And then you might ask, well, why doesn't Navalny want these results released? So they've never released them to the Russian government, which said we can't open an investigation into a supposed poisoning unless we have some medical evidence that he was poisoned. Regardless, miraculously, after 33 days, he was pronounced full bill of health and released from the German hospital. Yeah. Now, he has, from this earlier mentioned Yves Rocher fraud case, he was given a suspended sentence in that case. His brother went to jail. His involvement was at a lower level. He was given a suspended sentence. And part of his requirements was that he was supposed to report to a police station once a month. Right? Hi, I'm here. During, of course, the case of his supposed illness, he wasn't able to make his appointments for his suspended sentence. Okay, they said no big deal on that. But now the German hospital says that you've got a free bill of health after just a month, and you're back on the streets. So we expect you to show up. If you don't show up, then you'll be in violation of your parole. Of course, Navalny didn't show up at that time. And then a couple months later, he announced he was flying back to Moscow. And the Russian Federal Penitentiary Service said, okay, you come back, just so you know, we will detain you and you will face trial you will go to court for violating your parole. He came back anyway, of course. He was immediately detained at the airport. And then they called for these protests in Moscow. And across the country against him. And this is this last weekend what resulted. Now, in Russia right now, there aren't any protests allowed for any reason, be it for Navalny and his liberal nationalists, or for the communists or anyone else, because there is a global pandemic on right now. And big public rallies are still banned in the country. Now, this is the exact same in London, across most of Europe and everywhere else. But we'll ignore that, right? We will pretend not to notice that in any articles that we write about these Russian protests, because we support Navalny because he's against Putin. So people did come out across Russia in the tens of thousands in a country of 148 million. 200 there, 200 there. It's pretty much the normal protest turnout anywhere they protest, his supporters, be they liberals or misguided liberals, in my opinions, or nationalists. He thinks it's a good idea that he can appeal to both. In Moscow, the official turnout was 4,000. That is an undercount. His own team announced there were 45,000. That is a gross overestimate. There's a good figure by the Kommersant newspaper, which is known for being critical of the government, but not rabidly anti-Putin. And they put the numbers somewhere between 20 and 25,000, which is what it probably was. So 25,000 people showed out. They were, of course, not supposed to protest. And then they tried to march towards the Kremlin, of course. Police stopped them. They tried to disperse them. And I have to say that probably the majority of the protesters were peaceful. But like in any of these situations, there were a number of them among the crowd who were engaging in melee with the police, who were throwing glass bottles, who were throwing flares, who were throwing snowballs, pelting the police. And you might say, throwing snowballs. Well, in case you didn't notice, in the United States, throwing snowballs at police is regularly regarded as felony assault, and it is regularly charged as such, mostly because of then, the ability that if you're throwing snowballs, that can easily escalate to something else, and some snowballs could actually hurt you. So 50-some police were injured in these protests that occurred on Saturday. And the protesters also attacked a FSB, like an FBI car that was traveling by. They assaulted the car. They smashed the windows and evidently attempted to drag the driver of the car through the windows, which resulted in his eye being gouged out.
What does FSB stand for?
It is the Federal Security Bureau,
okay.
You could say in English. Yeah, it's like the FBI. It's an analogous organization. So, and, we have this constant presentation, this never mentioning his actual political views. I was engaged in debate on France 24 online with a number of Western journalists that full-throated support Alexei Navalny. And the constant thing is his political views are irrelevant. The guy that we are promoting as the opposition leader in Russia, the political opposition leader, his political views don't matter. They're irrelevant. We don't want to talk about them. We want to talk instead about this. We want to talk about his poisoning. I was like, okay, you want to talk about his poisoning? Okay. Was that the story with the teacup, with the magic underpants, the doorknob, or the water bottle? Because the story, the narrative of this poisoning keeps changing. Of course, they don't really want to talk about that or the symptoms, effects, onset times that make this whole story rather ridiculous and a psyop designed to present him as some type of martyr figure. But they get very, very angry when you talk about his political views. His political views have evolved, they will say. No, he's here quoted as saying is he has the same beliefs. So if his position on immigration has changed, what is it now? Silence, right? They, of course, don't want to talk about this. Yeah. I gave you his policy positions. How would you clarify someone in the U.S. who had those positions?
I mean, he seems like a neocon to me.
Yeah,
basically, a capital globalist neocon.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested too, as well as all his foreign policy positions, and more about the economics. But I mean, he seems like a very stronghold, right-wing, nationalist, like he does.
Isn't he being promoted by
his own
you
QAnon
put that out
shaman
there?
over here?
Yeah, the Western liberal media has their own QAnon shaman imitator.
Yeah, that's of course, in these Russian protests, one of his supporters was there dressed as a Russian analog of the QAnon shaman, with, of course, the red, white, and blue being the Russian flag instead of the stars and American stars and stripes. They don't want to talk about that because that's far too apropos, of course, for the poisonous blend of his supporters.
Right.
Now, to understand where this ethno-nationalism, racialism come for, I thought he's a Russian nationalist. How can he be pro-EU, pro-US? This is where he also appeals to many liberals in Russia, right? Liberals are a fringe ideology in Russia because of the legacy of the 1990s when they wrecked the economy and every Russian lost their life saving. It's why liberals still can't get elected in this country. Leftists, yes. Communists, they get elected. The dominant party, United Russia, is kind of statist, leftish economically in terms of big state, but mildly socially conservative. That's where most of the country is coming from. But liberals, they believe that they want Russia to be just a normal European country, like the Netherlands. Okay, never mind that Russia stretches from Europe to the Pacific Ocean and encompasses 12 time zones. Is surrounded by a whole host of countries and has this mix of some 188 plus ethnicities and religions in it. They believe that Russia has a European destiny, and they want Russia to become part of the EU, and then therefore, of course, essentially a client state and resource appendage of the United States. Never mind the geographical insanity of that idea that the biggest country in the world could never, ever just be a normal, foreign policy subservient country like the Netherlands. This is also based in ethno-nationalism, because these people take a look at all of the non-Slavic peoples of Russia, particularly ethnic Russians, say also Belarusians and Ukrainians who are part of Russia. They look at all of these Asiatic peoples and they don't like them because they believe that because of their usual support of the Russian government politically, because it does support a multi-ethnic, multi-confederation, they view these people as backwards, that they are holding the country back from its Asiatic destiny because they have a tendency to support authoritarianism. So that's where the liberalism coincides with the nationalism. And the truth is, for many, not all, but many liberals in Russia, if you scratch them, you'll find an ethno-racist under the surface because they want a Russia for white Russians so that then they can be part of Europe.
Ah, makes sense. So I think that gets us into a part about what does the part of the U.S. play with this?
Well, yeah, because, there's a lot of the left here has a tendency to right away say, oh, it's a revolution. Let's support it. Let's support the Hong Kong protests, ignoring the money ties to, to these NGOs. And same thing when we started hearing about this, even some people were like, because Bernie Sanders and Adam Schiff both were, congratulating or like advocating for Navalny and like saying that, kind of equating him to being a political prisoner of sorts. And it was interesting because I haven't heard either of those two say anything about Julian Assange. So I just kind of want to know, is there enough evidence to kind of show that this is a color revolution? Do you is there like a money tie, or is there enough evidence? Because what it seems like to me, based on what you're saying and based on my own research, is that the U.S. is propping up, not just the U.S., but the West is propping up this man in order to push a coup. And would you describe this as a color revolution?
Okay, well, first of all, a color revolution in Russia is actually realistic. The man has so little support, like around, again, 2%. Even if you want to say on a really good day, say 5, tag in a general anti-government vote or something like this, the man doesn't have the support for that. There isn't going to be a coup or a color revolution in Russia. There will be messy protests that will be blown out of all proportion. Tens of thousands, even 5,000 is within the realm of extreme possibility at some time in the future. But they're not going to overthrow the Russian government. The Russian government has taken a lot of steps in recent years to really limit the activity of Western NGOs and so forth in the country. Alexei Navalny, there's really no way to prove. He doesn't get any funds wired to him by the State Department or the National Endowment for Democracy. They're a little more subtle than that now. The way, Western-leaning NGOs in Russia are funded is they get anonymous funding via Bitcoin or anonymous private donors online. And I have no doubt that there's a certain amount of funding from the West coming into Navalny. And you have the full-throated support of Western governments, of course, denouncing his arrest, ignoring the entire thing about the case against the French cosmetics firm Yves Rocher, because that's inconvenient. The fraud and embezzlement there of a Western company. If you want a point at direct evidence, therefore, it's really light. It's at a different, more level. It's the idea of destabilization, of supporting him with the media, supporting him with the government. Those are the big things. And of course, you have this whole story about his poisoning, right? I believe that this was a psyop cooked up to present him as a martyr. And I think the Russian government needs to conduct, they say that he is supported by him. Okay, well, I think they need to prove that then to the Russian people and the world. They need to conduct an official investigation into any collaboration of him with U.S. or German or U.K. intelligence agencies. And methods and sources be damned, they need to reveal the evidence they have of that to the world. But if you just want to go on anecdotal things, there's this guy named John Brennan. Have you ever heard of him?
We're going to talk about Brennan today.
Yeah, John Brennan, the director of the CIA under Obama.
Great guy.
Largely still regarded to be as one of the biggest figures in the U.S. deep state. He tweeted out just a few months ago, wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't we have a peaceful world if Joe Biden was president of the United States and Alexei Navalny was president of the Russian Federation? Yeah. Well, we're halfway there.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah. Even though what you're saying is true, he doesn't have a lot of support. Neither did Juan Guaido. And look how far the neocons attempted to go. Because if we're looking at what the U.S. has already said, every single major political leader in the U.S. has already announced their support for him. So to me, that worries me because I know our book. I know what we do. And so it does make me a little bit more calm to hear that, this isn't going to happen. But I don't put it past the West. You know what I mean? Especially because they hate Putin so much and they want to turn Russia into, extension.
Yeah. And Mark, not only do we have the Brennan situation, we have the whole solar winds hacked. The solar winds hacked when they blamed it on Russia immediately. Like they had no proof, so they blamed the solar winds hacked on that. We have Adam Schiff, Bernie Sanders, John Brennan, all these figures. Fee just said the playbook is there, and they're going to keep it on until things go down. You know what I'm saying? So go ahead and you can piggyback off that.
The solar winds hack, that could have been Russia. It could not have been. I don't know. That is espionage. And countries regularly conduct espionage of each other. The UK was caught in a big computer espionage case against the Netherlands a couple of years ago. The US regularly does computer espionage against all of its own allies, much less its enemies. General Michael Hayden, the former director of the CIA and the NSA, said that we conduct offensive cyber operations against Russia every hour of every day, right? That is the normal state of the world. It was actually Putin who came to both Obama and Trump then, both presidents in recent years, and said, this cyber warfare stuff, espionage warfare, is getting a little out of hand. Let us sign a treaty, saying that you don't hack us, we don't hack you, or at the very least, let's what we did with nuclear weapons and create rules of the road. These things are part of normal espionage activity. These things are not allowed. The U.S. just completely rebuffed him both times. We're not even going to discuss that. So we are in a world where you do have to acknowledge that all countries are continually doing computer espionage against each other at all times. Then the point is, how does that computer espionage then dovetail, or slide down into something much more dangerous, which is cyber warfare. But the fact that all of these U.S. John Brennan are openly backing Navalny, calling for his release, giving full-throated support to him. Russia almost certainly regards, first of all, it's actually not going to help Navalny in this country. It's only going to make people more and more afraid of him. All right, so that is shooting yourself in the foot right there. Second of all, that is regarded by the Russian government as serious meddling in their domestic affairs and their domestic politics. And if they did not intervene in 2016 and help get Donald Trump elected with a few Facebook memes, which I don't believe they did, they will certainly be looking for ways to interfere in American politics now. Thank you very much.
Damn.
And I mean, can you blame them?
No.
So this is another reason. Far be it, from me not wanting, being an immigrant to Russia myself, I don't want an anti-immigrant far right figure becoming more powerful. Again, it's ridiculous to think he could overthrow the government, but destabilizing the country in any way, I don't want that. But on top of that, they are really increasing the amount of meddling activity that is, we're in an escalation cycle, and it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. And besides, we've seen this. U.S. government supports right-wing figures like John Guaido in Venezuela. They supported this right-wing coup in Bolivia. They supported the Al-Qaeda allied Libyan Islamic fighting group in Libya. They supported a whole grab bag. I mean, not just supported, literally armed, trained, and salaried jihadists and Islamists allied with Al-Qaeda in Syria. They support these West Ukrainian ultra-nationalists / Banderite fascists in Ukraine. Yeah. And they're willing to support anyone if they think it furthers U.S. foreign policy interests, which as far as they're concerned means global hegemony. Yeah. And there's actually a big connection between Navalny and what happened in Ukraine. The whole creation, it's a project, this Navalny figure. The governments in the post-Soviet space were allied with Russia and, like the Russian government, are these multi-ethnic, multi-confederal federation, right? The attempt to create civic governments out of the post-Soviet space. There's not enough liberals, right, to overthrow, to win elections or to overthrow these governments. There are also not enough nationalists, right, to win elections. But if you find a way to combine the two of them, and I pointed out that ethno-nationalist connection there earlier, then that becomes a more potent force. In Russia, it's still relatively minor because the level of liberals and the level of ethnic nationalists is much less. But in Ukraine, this was exactly the unholy combination of pro-European, pro-Western liberals and these ultra-nationalists, these Banderite fascists that served in the vanguard, with full-throated support by the U.S. government, Victoria Nuland picking the next prime minister of the country, Jeffrey Piat, and so on. It worked there. They are trying the same thing in Belarus. And that's not to say that Lukashenko isn't a dictator. He actually is, unlike Putin. But Putin's actually going to wean him off. Putin is making sure that after constitutional reform happens in Belarus that he's gone anyway, because he has lost the support of the people in that country. But in Russia, they're trying to do thing now with support of Alexei Navalny. It's not going to succeed. Again, there's not going to be a color revolution here, but there will be a degree of destabilization and so on, and a further escalation of this type of information warfare between the two countries that is really not in any of our interests.
So we know why the U.S. and and certain government factions support or support Navalny. But why do the people specifically support him? Is it because just a hatred of Putin and embracing of the Western capitalist mentality?
Yeah.
It
Okay,
seems like a lot of young people too, Mark. A lot of young people out there.
Okay. So there's a lot of young people in protests in any country. And I was worried about the turnout, this whole TikTok meme thing. But actually, the number of young people that turned out was actually relatively low. I looked at it. I looked at the numbers and everything. So that was a little bit overblown. The numbers of young people in these protests are no different than the numbers of young people protesting in any country, because young people are more likely to protest, right? But it's not excessively so. And there weren't huge numbers of children there. There were some, right, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, but not a huge number. So that was a little bit blown out of proportion in the media, because they want to present it as the young people rising up to overthrow the government. Yeah, it's not necessarily true. But he does have a number of liberal pro-EU supporters, right? He does have a number of nationalist supporters. Again, that's his whole shtick. He says he thinks it's a positive that he can combine, get support, speak to both of them as he sees it. Never mind the dichotomies of what liberalism should be and what liberals in Russia actually are. But there were also plenty of people there with the 1488 hats. For those of you who don't know, that is neo-Nazi skinhead code. That is the 14 words, and the 88 is the code for Hitler. Again, there weren't large numbers of those there, but there weren't large numbers of people in general. Again, tens of thousands. But he does have his hardcore, very activist base, no matter how small it is, and it is small, but they can regularly turn out these protests of tens of thousands of people. Again, this is a city of 14 million people, Moscow. Moscow's, the major city that counts in a country of 148 million. That's not to say that he has no support, but it remains small, and there's really no indication, no matter how much they try to present it otherwise, that it's growing. And the violence in these protests and this full-throated U.S. government, John Brennan, and everything support for it is really not going to convince large numbers of other Russians to come out and support Navalny. I'm sorry, Russians aren't that stupid, right? They read Russian media. They're regularly exposed to media. They actually get Russians today actually get most of their news online, so they are exposed to everything. And I would say, on a whole, they're probably more savvy news consumers than the average American. That's a generalization.
No,
but they at least know enough to not trust everything their government says. That just means that they also don't trust everything other governments say. So I don't have any real fears of a color revolution scenario here, but he does have his mix of supporters, and some of them are merely misguided. Some of them have general European aspirations that I also feel are misguided, but he does also have his nationalist and ethnic nationalist supporters as well. Yeah. So it's a mixed grab bag.
Yeah, but
and of course the Russian QAnon chairman.
Oh, yeah, you get the Russian QAnons. What does this mean moving forward for the U.S., though? Because, as Joe Biden came back into power, we hear Victoria Nuland back on the spot. We think about what's going to happen as far as, and we have this tweet up here. It says, breaking prompt statement by the Biden administration on Russian protests, condemning harsh tactics, crackdown and detentions. Same playbook. U.S. will stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies and partners in defense of human rights, whether in Russia or wherever they come.
Except in their own country.
Except for here at home, But we talk about you drew that line as far as like what they were looking to do in Ukraine, and we've heard little whispers coming from the little Twitter world that looks like the Biden campaign is going to be back to supporting the Western Ukrainian ultra-nationalist right-wing kind of party, and here we see them looking at Navalny in the same kind of light. So what does the U.S. mean for the U.S., and what do they hope to get out of this as far as, pushing this same type of leader that's going to be really loyal to the EU and to Western influence.
Yeah. Okay. So first about protests. I've been detained for protest in the U.S., the U.K., Canada, the EU, and Russia.
Wow.
All right. So
Badass.
I've been detained for protest in all of these countries. And I can honestly say that in general, political protest in Russia is less brutally enforced than it is in the United States. I mean, when all of these people were arrested at these Navalny protests, they're immediately in the police van tweeting about it and making TikTok videos because they're left with their smartphones.
Wow.
Right? Those things are never actually taken away from them. You know, let's go to the protest and we can keep each other warm and make videos in the police vans and at the police station. Because in all circumstances, these people are detained. I've done it myself. And probably in about 45 minutes to an hour and a half, they sign a piece of paper saying, I shouldn't have been at that protest, right? It wasn't, official. It wasn't registered. There's a global pandemic on, whatever. And then they're released, right? Unless they actually do violence against the police. And if you take a look, yes, particularly in this last protest, when there was violence from the protesters, there were plenty of instances where the Russian police went overboard with the truncheons and so on. But you also notice that unlike in the US and unlike in Europe, there was no tear gas, there was no water cannons, there was no rubber bullets. And I attribute that mostly to the Russian police, whatever you may think of the government, has a more efficient use of physical force. They have a way of being able to pick people. Two of them come up, will pick you up by your elbows, right? If you don't want to, go along peacefully, and they can do it without any type of violence, general in most situations, as long as they aren't having glass bottles thrown in their faces or flares or, fisticuffs being thrown at them. They're just more efficient at it. So you really do not see the complete militarized police state that you do at, say, the George Floyd protests in the U.S. last year, when 15,000 people were detained during those protests. So I think you really need a comparative perspective of police state violence, whether it's in Russia or whether it's in the West, and decide if what is being made out of it in the press is hyperbole or not. And I think in a lot of cases it is. Out of foreign policy wise, where does this put us moving forward? Well, mostly bad, of course. We're going to see an escalation of bad international relations between the U.S. and Russia in a whole host of areas, not just this support of Navalny, which is regarded as a political attack, right? Interfering in domestic political affairs in Russia. But in Syria, where John Biden principals like Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken have promised a return to Assad must go regime change type activity, the Russian government, they are fully on the ground there. Of course, there still are U.S. military occupation forces occupying the oil fields in East Syria. They're probably going to increase, and it is very likely that you could see a return to Biden actually providing support, not just for the Kurds, but for actual Islamists and jihadists again, as the Obama administration did. The same thing in Ukraine. The Biden administration has promised that they will send more lethal weapons to the Ukrainian putsch government in Kiev, right? Which, of course, the whole purpose there is not actually to kill Russians, but to kill Eastern Ukrainians, right, that don't agree with the overthrow of their government in 2014. But Russia will, of course, immediately supply a symmetrical military aid to Eastern Ukraine, right, to the Donbass in response. And being as they live right next door and have much more at stake historically, geographically, and, in every manner of respect and actual connection, ethnic and brotherhood ties with a lot of the people in Ukraine, they will have escalation superiority. So the only thing that is going to do is increase the chances of military violence, Ukrainians killing Ukrainians in Ukraine. And I do not think that's a good thing, having a lot of family in East Ukraine. In other situations, there are isolated areas where you will see a slight improvement over the Trump administration's incompetence, particularly on the New START treaty. The Biden has already signaled that it does want at least a temporary renewal of New START, probably 5 years, while they talk about renegotiating the terms, adding in new technologies, other countries, and so far. And that, I think, is an unequivocal good thing, because New START is the last bedrock foundation of the Cold War security architecture. It's the only thing that's left, that literally. And it's the one that limits the amount of warheads and launchers directly pointed at each other at any given time. Now, there's already an arms race between not just the U.S. and Russia, but China. U.S., Russia, China, Iran, India, the EU, right? There's a big multipolar arms race going on right now in terms of technology, in terms of hypersonic weapons, in terms of drone swarms, underwater drones, hypersonic glide vehicles, all this, and of course, missile defense. And that was all kicked off by the U.S. unilaterally pulling out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2003 under then George W. Bush. So we're already in a qualitative arms race. If New START disappeared as the Trump administration, we would then be in a quantitative arms race. How many launchers and missiles do we actively have pointed at each other as well? And I'm sorry, only a madman wants that. Trump was a madman. Biden at least has U.S. national security interests, not wanting a nuclear apocalypse between these two countries at him. And he has indicated that he will renew this. Russia was always asking for this. So that is likely one small area of sanity and cooperation that we are likely to see amongst what I expect to all be very bad. And of course, the reappointment of the neocon who served in the Dick Cheney vice presidency, who served under Obama and was behind a lot of what happened with the putsch in Ukraine in 2014. Biden has reappointed her to a new position at the State Department, and I expect that she will probably go on tour in Europe with her hit track single "F the EU."
Yeah, it's amazing because these people, Victoria Nuland, we talk about her. And Joe Biden gave the thumbs up for the coup. I think we can't forget about these things.
And his family personally profited off of it. Obviously not enough.
Well, he went to China then got a little extra bucks too. So, I mean.
The thing I would point out there is that the neocons win whoever is in the White House.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trump promises no regime change. He promises improved relations with Russia. And the neocons end up in the White House anyway. Trump appointed them, whether he was forced to do it through by the Senate or he just changed his mind every 15 minutes. It doesn't matter. The neocons end up in charge. Obama defeats Trump, a restoration of sanity and dignity and so on. And the neocons are back in the White House.
Yeah.
Cheney,
Lincoln,
Obama,
Lloyd
Trump,
Austin,
Biden again.
Yeah.
The neocons win no matter what.
Yeah.
And that is really disheartening from a U.S. foreign policy, perspective.
No. Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming on with us today. You got any other questions, Johnny?
No, thanks so much, Mark.
Yeah, it's great that you laid it all out for us and let us understand what's going on.
Straight from Moscow.
You know what I'm saying? So you got anything lastly to tell us? Anywhere else we can find you? Any new shows you're on where you're yelling at people?
Any vodka you'll be sending our way?
Anything like that going on?
I do owe you a Shopko Shanka furry hat, and I have not forgotten that.
We're waiting. We're waiting for the mark.
Yeah. Russian vodka is great for regular vodka. I gotta tell you though, actually, I love Stoli's. Really? As it's sold in the United States. It's kind of an abbreviation of the Russian brand Stolichnaya. It's not actually Russian. It's made in the Baltics. You actually can't buy it in Russia because there's all kinds of trademark wars going on with the name Stoli's and this referring to the Stolichnaya brand in Russia, which does not make good flavored vodka. So every time I go abroad or my wife goes abroad, I said, bring me back a bottle of Stoli's Vanille
Oh,
from
okay.
Customs.
Now we know what to get him.
Oh my God.
God. Yeah, pure vodka, yes, Russian vodka. Flavored vodka, I'm sorry, I like the. I'm a trader. I like the
Traitor.
Estonian stuff that's sold in the
telling
United
Putin.
States.
That's it. We're gonna let Putin know. He's gonna knock on your door and show up and whisk you out of there, pal.
Yeah, probably. I mean, the FSB is probably listening to me right now, and now I'm gonna be dead. Yeah. And you know what else is big on my shelf? Jack Daniel's honey whiskey.
Oh,
This is
you
not a
just did-
promotion for Jack Daniels.
not
just
bad.
the foo-foo in you, my
Yeah,
friend.
vanilla.
Oh my God.
Honey, what is that?
Yeah.
Well, like, what are you
The
gonna do?
Russians
Mango
were
flavored
tough.
rum, please. You're supposed to have ice in your veins
I
over there in
know.
Moscow.
Yeah. I also make Texas smoked
yeah, that's
barbecue and coleslaw. So you know,
Yeah, well,
you can
let me-
take the American out of America, but you can't take the American out of the American. Something like that.
something like
like
that.
that.
Let me just say to you, my friend, thank you for coming on, and Nostrovia to you.
That's the role.
We'll see you soon, Mark. Ladies and
Bye,
gentlemen, that's
Cheers.
Mark the Shark Sleboda coming to us live from Moscow. For Pasta Jardula,
And Fiorella.
Johnny soon. We'll see you back in a little bit. We're going to have a little bit of a break, and then we'll be back with the live show. Is that what we're calling it?
Yes.
The main show.
Oh, yeah. I got some shit to say.
Oh, yeah, we got some things to talk about.
Oh, yeah. Come
Combo in
out.
a little bit.